Good evening, everyone. Fix the backdrop a bit. Gordon Causey, coming to you live and unscripted, as always, or almost always. On this, it is now just before midnight on the 14th of January, Sunday, the 14th of January, 2024. The video I did yesterday, I said 2023 out of habit. How many of us do that every year around this time? Write down the old year instead of the new year, or say the old year instead of the new year. Live chat is on, so if anyone wants to comment, get out of my pocket. She's coming after me for her treat. I'll get Candy out of the way. Shake paw, lay down, speak. Good. There you go. Candy is taken care of. If you're new to my channel, that's de rigueur. I start out most of my videos that way. And I also start a lot of my videos by saying I just wanted to do a quick video. Well, this is probably not going to be quick. I'm going to take as much time as it takes. That is what it is going to take. So if you have a short attention span, if you're used to TikTok, oh well, this probably isn't for you. But with that being said, the likes, I appreciate those who do hit the thumbs up, and thank you to everyone who has subscribed. If you want to subscribe, you're most welcome. It is appreciated. The topic of today's video is why this conflict that's going on between Israel and the Palestinians, that there is no solution to it. It is a problem without a solution. And I'm going to explain why I hold this view, and I'm going to back up my opinion. But before doing that, I have stated in previous videos something that I think is very important, and that is to state biases up front. We all have biases, and I'm no different. I have a bias, and I am decidedly pro-Israel. Why am I decidedly pro-Israel? It's entirely based on my Christian faith. This is a Bible. That is where my pro-Israel bias comes from. I do not ascribe to what is referred to as either supersessionist or otherwise known as replacement theology. Supersessionists, those who adhere to this doctrine of replacement theology, hold that the Israel of the Bible has no more standing, that the Big C Church has replaced Israel, has superseded Israel, and that any of the prophecies and any of the writings specific to the people of Israel or Israel, the country, that they no longer apply. I do not hold to this doctrine. I hold to biblical doctrine. The founding documents of the Christian faith are contained within the New Testament. The Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, the letters, Revelation. That is the foundation of the Christian faith. This supersessionist or replacement theology is a doctrine that was introduced starting in the 2nd century. The Bible, the New Testament, all the books of the New Testament were written in the 1st century. And then in the 2nd century, Gentile converts to Christianity came in and reinterpreted what was written. It was in the 2nd century when Israel ceased to exist. There was a revolt by the Jewish population in Roman-occupied Judea. And then a second revolt, the Bar Kokhba revolt, which happened early in the 2nd century, sometime around 125, give or take. I should look that up, but it's right in the early first 2-3 decades of the 2nd century. There was a major revolt, another major revolt by the Jewish population in Roman-occupied Judea. And it was at that point that the Romans wiped the name Israel off the map and changed the name to Palestina, which is where we get this term Palestine today. And that doctrine, saying that the Big C Church had replaced Israel, that Jerusalem was no longer significant, that the Israelites, the people of Israel, that they were no longer God's chosen covenant people, that doctrine held sway for a very long time. And to a degree, and I've mentioned this in at least one previous video, that doctrine had a certain degree of logic to it, right into the 20th century, because Israel did not exist. So how can the prophecies relating to God gathering back the lost tribes of Israel, bringing back the scattered Israelites, bringing them back into the promised land, how can that come to fruition if there is no Israel to bring them back to? And so there was a logic to replacing Israel, the place, and the Israelites, the people, and say, no, now the Israelites are the people of the church, the Big C Church. But then 1948 came along, and now we can look at those prophetic writings and read them properly in the way that they were written. When was the Bible written? When were the books of the New Testament written? Paul's letters, like his letter to the Roman Church, when he was proclaiming in the 11th chapter that the Jews were still elect, that they were still elect for the sake of their forefathers. He was writing that 20 or so years after Jesus had gone to the cross, after his death and resurrection. It was prior to the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple by the Romans, and certainly before the second Bar Kokhba revolt, which happened again around 125. I know I don't have the year exactly right, but it's in around 125 AD. And then, of course, the scattering of the people of Israel to the four corners of the earth, not just an exile to one place, Babylon, but scattered to the, as the Bible says, to the four corners of the earth. And it says that in Isaiah, Jeremiah, in various books, in various Old Testament prophecies, certainly in Isaiah and Jeremiah. Anyway, so you have my bias now. I am decidedly pro-Israel, and it's based on my Christian faith and not adhering to supersessionist replacement theology that was introduced after the church had already been established. Now, why does this conflict that's raging right now between Israel and the Palestinian people, why is there no solution? And the reason is simple, is because the ultimate goal of both groups is ultimately the same. Israel maintains with absolute certitude its right to exist, and to exist within the confines of its present boundaries. And there are even elements within the Jewish population in Israel who would like to see those boundaries extended. They would like to see, I think the term is greater Israel, the Israel that was promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to their descendants. An area that would stretch perhaps as far as the Sinai Peninsula down in Egypt, all the way into the Euphrates River, which is in Iraq. But leaving that aside, Israel absolutely asserts its right to exist within its current borders. And there is a very extreme element of the Palestinian population, and as well in the broader Arab world, that absolutely does not affirm or recognize Israel's right to exist anywhere within the Arab world. And so you have two diametrically opposed ideologies, one firmly asserting its right to exist, and one firmly asserting that you have no right to exist in this location, in this Levantine coast, in this little strip of land, no larger than the size of New Jersey. And there is no solution to this problem. Before I got my feet back on the Christian path around the age of 40, I'm 57 now, born in 1966, and up until the age of 40, I would not have called myself a Christian. Back before I was 40, I would define myself as Christian. I would use it as an adjective. And I had a Christian outlook on the world, but I did not affirm Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. I even questioned his resurrection. I had lots of doubts, lots of questions that I no longer have. But prior to being on the Christian path, my attitude would have been, and it actually was at that time, because this conflict has been going on since Israel became a nation state in 1948. I actually, for my own part, I don't consider Israel to have become a nation state until 1949, after they won what they referred to as their War of Independence. Prior to that, Israel didn't exist. And it was that war that established Israel as a country. In 1948, on May 14th, they declared themselves an independent nation, much in a similar fashion to the way the United States declared itself a nation. They declared themselves independent from Great Britain on July 4th, 1776. But after that, a war raged, and I forget exactly when the U.S. War of Independence ended, but it was 2 or 3, I think it was 3 years, maybe, I think it was like 1780, 1779, or maybe even 1781. I mean, I'm not worried about the time. But the Battle of Concord is what ended the American Civil War. When was so it ended in 1783 in September. Actually, 1783 was when it formally ended, in terms of the signing of the treaty, a treaty at Paris. But it was the Battle of Concord, I think it was in 1781, when hostilities stopped and the U.S. won its independence. I'm sorry for digressing. But Israel They declared themselves an independent nation state on May 14th, but immediately they were invaded by 5 nations of the Arab League, by Egypt, by Syria, by Lebanon, by Jordan. They all invaded. And the Saudi Arabians also sent forces that were under Egyptian command. So it was 5 against 1. Those 5 nations at that time in 1948 had a combined population of over 30 million. Israel, by contrast, the number of Jews there numbered 700 to 800,000. And the Jews stayed and they fought. While many, 700 to 800,000 of the what have become known as Palestinians fled. And they refer to it as the Nakba. N-A-Q-B-A is how I think it's spelled. The English translation is the catastrophe. And if you think about it, from the Arab Islamic perspective, yeah, it was a catastrophe. Five countries sent troops to invade this little nascent nation. It should have been a walk in the park, you would think. Many of the people referred to now as Palestinians who fled and went to Jordan or to Lebanon and wanted to escape the fighting were under the misguided impression that they would be able to return, that Israel would be wiped off the map, it would no longer exist, and what would have happened if the Arab nations had won, would there be a Palestinian state? And I'm going to argue that no, there would not be a Palestinian state. What would have happened is those 4 invading countries, because Saudi Arabia, I do not believe, has a natural border with Israel, but Egypt does, Syria does, Lebanon does, Jordan does. I think they simply would have absorbed, they would have carved up Israel. They might have even started fighting amongst themselves over the spoils, because there has never been a Palestinian state. Those who have taken the side of Palestinians all too often are completely blind to history, and all they see is the current conflict. They see what's happening in Gaza, and it is absolutely horrific what is happening in Gaza. However, it's horrific because of what happened on October 7th. On October 7th, Saturday, October 7th, 2023, just last year, what precipitated Israel's response was horrific. And those who support Gaza, Hamas, the Palestinians, they've developed a fictional historical record of this country called Palestine that never existed. I'm going to go through a bit of the history. The Ottomans, for 400 to 500 years, controlled this area. They controlled what is now present-day Israel. It was within their empire. This was the age of empire, the 14, 15, 16, 17, 1800s. You had the French Empire, the British Empire, the Dutch Empire, the Russian Empire. You had and the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire waxed and waned, but it always had control over what many refer to as the Holy Lands of Judaism, Holy Lands of Christianity, and also the Holy Lands of Islam, like Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia. That was all Ottoman territory, Turkish territory. Was this area, did the Ottomans refer to it as Palestine? No. It was referred to as Syria. It was the southern portion of the Ottoman district of Syria, not Palestine. What happened is in World War I, the end of empire. That's one of the sobriquets given to World War I, when all the world's old great empires went at each other. When that war took place and the British won, they gained control over this area of Israel, what is Israel today. Actually, it was far bigger. That war, the First World War, ran from 1914 until 1918. And after that war ended, there was a peace treaty signed up, the Treaty of Versailles. However, there was dealing with the Middle East. They set up kind of a parallel little conference called the San Remo Conference that was dealing with how to carve up the Middle East and the old Ottoman territories. And it was in 1920 that the British mandate for Palestine was formally established at this conference, this San Remo Conference. And Palestine at that time, in 1920, comprised all of present-day Israel as well as all of present-day Jordan. It was a territory about the size of Iceland. And in 1921, Great Britain, under Winston Churchill, took the largest part of the Palestinian territory, their mandated territory of Palestine. They took about 75% of it, and they created a Palestinian state. The name that it was given was Transjordan because it crossed the Jordan River. And it was a protectorate of Great Britain. Great Britain had control of it, or they were a protectorate of it. It was an emirate state, like the United Arab Emirates now. I don't want to go too sidetracking into history, but what had happened was the Arabians had fought alongside the British against the Ottoman Turks. And then after World War I ended, there was something of a civil war in Arabia between the House of Saud and the House of Hashim. The House of Hashim had been the traditional rulers. They'd been the ones who had allied themselves with Great Britain, and they had been ruling Arabia. But after World War I ended, the Hashemites, as they are known, were ousted by the House of Saud, and that is why Arabia is now called Saudi Arabia, because it is ruled by the House of Saud, and the House of Hashim, or the Hashemites, were ousted. And so to pay back these Hashemites for having fought alongside Great Britain during the First World War, Winston Churchill created a state for the Hashemites out of the Palestinian territory that they were mandated to administer. And they gave 75% of their Palestinian mandate toward the creation of a protectorate referred to as Transjordan. That's what it was called initially. In 1946, Transjordan gained its independence from Britain, was no longer a protectorate, and they changed the name from Transjordan to simply Jordan. And this is significant, very significant, because what is a Palestinian? Well, now Palestinians include a large chunk, I think it's about 3 million people live in what is considered what is referred to as the West Bank. The West Bank is formerly Jordanian territory. However, not only did Jordan attack Israel in 1948, along with those 4 other nations who all sent troops to try and wipe Israel off the map, but they attacked again in 1967, sometimes referred to as the 6-Day War. And that was a 3-pronged attack. That was Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. Those three nations attacked Israel. And another catastrophe, 3-1, and still Israel won. And not only were they able to defend themselves, they also took territory from all three of those opposing nations. From Egypt, they captured the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip. From Jordan, they captured the West Bank. And from Syria, they took the Golan Heights, which overlook the Galilean Valley. Very strategic piece of real estate, because it's not just morally and military, you want to have the high ground. And so Syria, having control of these Golan Heights, gave them a strategic advantage, and they are a belligerent nation that has been threatening Israel's existence since its inception, since it declared its independence on May 14th, 1948. So taking those Golan Heights from Syria, from a strategic perspective, strictly from a strategic perspective, is, one might consider it absolutely vital. So in 1967, Israel seized the West Bank. Everyone living in the West Bank up until 1967, and even after, they were not Palestinians. They were Jordanians. And you could very easily make an argument that the population of Jordan, which is, I think, around 10 million, that they're all Palestinians. Jordan population. .15 according to Google. So are all those people living in Jordan, 11 or so million, that used to be Palestine. So I guess those are Palestinians. And when Israel took control of the West Bank in 1967, during that 6-day catastrophe from the perspective of Jordan and her allies, then around 3 million Jordanians suddenly became Palestinians. Please. What's so annoying about this whole debate, because that's what it's boiled down to, is that, and this is especially pervasive among younger people, and certainly among those who identify as being progressive left-wing types. And there's a Marxist ideology that takes incredibly complex situations and boils them down into something so stupid and simple that even a kindergartner can wrap their head around it. And it is the lens that everything is looked through is very simple, very basic. Just need a double-digit IQ to be able to sort it out. There is the oppressor and there is the oppressed. End of story. Everyone is either in one of two camps, a binary world. And you're either an oppressed person or you're an oppressor. And in terms of who do you support, well, the moral thing to do is you always have to side with the oppressed and protest against and be against the oppressor. And this is an annoying way of breaking down something incredibly complex and trying to make it so brain dead simple that morons can think they're being moralistic. If you look at what happened on October 7th, but you don't even have to look at October 7th, ever since 1948, ever since Israel declared its independence, its existence has been threatened There are elements within the Arab world, the Islamic world, that absolutely want Israel wiped off the map. And it's not just a fringe, tiny little element. It is, we're talking about the nation state of Egypt invaded in 1948, in 1967, in 1973. 1973 is referred to as the Yom Kippur War. Attacked. Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia sending troops. It's not just a fringe element. And now the major driver behind the conflict isn't any of those players. I think they finally learned their lesson that you poke the bear, and Israel is a bear, a lion. Don't poke the lion is a more biblical term. You don't poke the lion, but Iran now is the major thorn in Israel's side. They're the thorn in the lion's paw, to go back to Greek mythology. I don't know what Greek history, Greek literature. Androcles and the lion. They're the thorn in Israel's, the lion of Israel's paw. They're the ones sponsoring Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis now down in Yemen. And they absolutely want Israel wiped off the map. And so what is the solution to this? There's no two-state solution. They tried the two-state solution. Great Britain had its mandate. It had a mandate that was the size of Iceland, and they took 75% of that mandated territory, and they created a Palestinian state that was given the name Transjordan and later Jordan. So they tried the two-state solution. Didn't work. And then when they tried to divide up that little strip of land that was left, the 25% that remained, little sliver no bigger than the state of New Jersey, the UN and Great Britain, first Great Britain and later the UN, tried to create yet another Palestinian state. But the Arabs kept saying no, and they said no, have said no throughout history. After Israel won its war of independence and signed armistice agreements with the invading countries in 1949. I think it was in March of 1949 when that war finally ended. May or June of 1949, the United Nations finally recognized Israel as an independent nation state. I forgot the point I was going to make. I'm old. I go off on tangents. But the reason there's no solution to this is because, sadly, no one is going to give ground. And I want to combat one argument I'm seeing by the pro-Palestinian camp, and that is that Israel's reaction to what happened on October 7th is disproportional. That it is a well-established fact that Hamas has built a tunnel network in Gaza that is larger than the New York subway system. They refer to it as the Gaza Metro. And they have command centers and storage and sleeping facilities, and some tunnels are so big that vehicles can go through. They use this network to smuggle in arms through the border with Egypt. They're able to bring in the rockets that they're able to fire on Israel. And they absolutely do embed themselves within civilian populations. And basically, they go to ground. And Israel is faced with a horrendous prospect 250 or so hostages taken, 1,400 of their citizens murdered savagely. And now they go to respond and they have to attack an enemy in one of the most densely populated areas on the planet Earth, with an enemy that has embedded itself within civilian populations. What are you supposed to do? Just kill the exact, kill 1,400 Gazans? I don't like the term Palestinian, because this term Palestinian makes no sense. The people of Gaza used to be Egyptians until 1967. They weren't Palestinians. In 1967, I guess suddenly they became Palestinians, same as the Jordanians. Now all of a sudden they're Palestinians. Why not call everyone a Palestinian? This is a war. This is a war that is going on. And it's an ideological war, and it's a territorial war, and it is a religious war. The Muslims claim, their assertion is that the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount is the third most holy site in Islam, after Mecca. Mecca's number one, Medina's number two. Those are two cities that Muhammad actually visited. It's documented that he visited in those two cities. The Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem is Muhammad never, there's no documented evidence that he ever set foot in Jerusalem. The Al-Aqsa Mosque was not even built until after Muhammad died. Fact check it, look it up. Educate yourself. Their third most holy site is based on the claim that Muhammad took a magical journey on a magical creature and visited the furthest mosque. It doesn't say Jerusalem in the Quran. He went from the nearest mosque to the furthest mosque. Well, then later, after the Arabs had conquered, sometime in the 600s, after Muhammad had died, the Arab Caliphate conquered the land of Israel. They conquered this region. They conquered Jerusalem, and then they built a mosque on the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, I think, is in the same complex as the Dome of the Rock. There's so much history here. I'm learning about it, I want to say every day, but more like every week. I'm constantly trying to augment what I know, challenge what I know, look at things differently. I read a lot of Al Jazeera articles because I don't want to be in an echo chamber. Ultimately, what has to happen in this conflict is Israel has constantly had to fight for its right to exist. And even if they wipe out Hamas, even if they achieve ultimate victory and eradicate Hamas from Gaza, it doesn't end, because Iran, which sponsored Hamas, is also sponsoring Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis down in Yemen. And the war will never end. If you read your Bible, you'll know that it's prophesied that the world's armies are going to surround the nation state of Israel. And it is certainly looking like we are on that path. I'm not predicting it right now or anytime in the reasonably foreseeable future. I'm not predicting it, but I can certainly envision it coming to pass given the way that things are playing out now. We have Yemen, which initially they were simply sending missiles and drones and attacking ships that were passing along their coastline on the Red Sea. And I got this from an Al Jazeera article, and I agreed with their analysis. They were saying that the United States did not want to engage in a direct attack on Yemen itself because that would lead to the prospect of of escalating the conflict. And I'll explain how this conflict can escalate very easily. But Al Jazeera, their columnist, was making a very valid point that the reason that the U.S. was only intercepting the missiles and shooting down the drones and providing convoy escorts to merchant ships in the Red Sea was because a direct assault on Yemen itself would risk escalating the war. And how would that happen? It's because while most of the Arab world is not, I don't think there is a truly democratic country in the Middle East. Iraq isn't a democracy. We have the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is a theocracy. Saudi Arabia is an emirate. Syria is run by Bashar al-Assad, a dictator. Egypt is dictatorial. So Israel is the lone democracy in the entire Middle East. But even though the rest of the Arab world, the Middle East, isn't democratic, that doesn't mean that public sentiment doesn't mean anything. And you may remember there was the Arab Spring. I believe it started in Egypt, where Arab peoples were uprising. And it's hard enough trying to understand things from your own cultural background. It's harder even still. You talk about swimming in a sea of ignorance when you try and look at things through the perspective of a culture that is foreign to you. But regardless of that, acknowledging that I'm swimming in a sea of ignorance, I'm still going to try and see things through that lens. And the Arabians, the Saudis, the Saudi Arabians, they used to have an empire. The Egyptians used to have an empire. The Persians used to have an empire, the Persians being Iran. And they all, I believe, see themselves as being the champions of the Arab world. Nasser in Egypt wanted to be the champion of the Arab world. I think that's what we're seeing with Iran. They want to present themselves as the champions of the Arab world. And so the fear is that there will be an Arab uprising, and that the Persian Gulf, the Middle East, is still vitally important to the globe because it is still the world's I'm not sure if it's the largest provider of oil anymore. We've got so much in the North Sea and everything, in Venezuela and my own native Canada, but there's still a major contributor to world oil supplies. So it's vitally important. And that's the reason why the US has bases in places like Qatar and Bahrain, and they want to have a military presence throughout the region to protect their economic interests. And Iran paints the United States in this Pax Americana system as an oppressive force, Western imperialism that basically pushes the Arab world down. And Iran wants to rid the world, or certainly at least rid the Middle East, of this oppressive American imperialism that's imposed itself on the region. And so this is where I say it's very easy to see how things could escalate and now what we've had is, since I read that article, at the time I read that article was 2 or 3 weeks ago in Al Jazeera about why the US was holding back from launching direct assaults onto Yemen. Now, within the last few days, they have actually launched assaults on Yemen proper. And those assaults now have prompted a response from the Houthis, and they are saying they are going to escalate. They're going to escalate. The wild card in all this, I saw an excellent video, and I wish I could reference it now, but I can't because I don't have it up. But it equated things to a chessboard, and it had Israel and Iran as the opponents. And it was referring to Iran's proxies, Hezbollah, Houthis, Hamas, etc., as chess pieces. And Hamas in Gaza is actually a minor piece, like a knight, not a pawn maybe, but maybe like a knight. A little tricky, hard to figure out, can move around, can move asymmetrically. But the piece that this video I watched, it was Hezbollah, which is centered in Lebanon. They are considered the queen by the analysis that I saw, the queen that Iran has that they could play. But right now, the way things are so unstable right now in the world, and this is where things get scary because we have an established order right now. It's Pax Americana, and it's far from perfect. The Americans are America first, and they don't care if a country like Iran, it was run by the Shah of Iran, who was a brutal dictator. They supported Saddam Hussein for years, armed him, supplied him with chemical weapons when Iraq and Iran were fighting a war. The U.S. is, but they're the strong arm, which basically establishes a form of order in the Middle East. And Sharon Allegiance, thank you for the Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you as well. I'm doing all right. I'm doing okay. Thank you for asking. I hope you're doing well as well. And I appreciate engagement. If I say I have a few people watching, if you want to join with share, I wish you had an easier username. Sharuyan Allegiance. You're most welcome. But with the U.S. now, what can happen is as things escalate and things start becoming less and less stable, then what you have Iran, I think, is absolutely 100% wanting to see Israel, the United States, Western allies engaged, bogged down, so that they can come in and kind of clean up. They stand back, let others fight it out, weaken themselves, keep your powder dry, and then come storming in. Okay, she gave me a phonetic way to say it. Sharuyan. It's the best I can do. Sharuyan. It's the double R that messes me up. So I did want to cover one last thing, and that is, and I've touched on this before, but I want to go and do it again, is this justification. The justification for the October 7th attack on Israel is that Palestinians, so-called Palestinians, those living in Gaza and the West Bank, live under horrific, inhumane, apartheid-like conditions. And I don't dispute that. I don't dispute that the conditions that the people of Gaza and the West Bank live under, that they are draconian and that they are almost dystopian, to throw out my $50 adjectives. But it's a horrible situation that they are living under. However, why are they living under those conditions? Because of the constant intifadas or uprisings, where there are terrorist actions constantly being launched from the West Bank from Gaza against Israeli citizens. And so to protect its citizens, Israel has brought in, they put that border fence around Gaza. They have military checkpoints. So when someone wants to leave Gaza to go and visit relatives, maybe in the West Bank or vice versa, they have to go through military checkpoint because they want to make sure that they're not a suicide bomber, that they're not carrying rockets, grenades, or other firearms. How do you keep your citizens safe? I'm going to invite you. I don't have much in the way of technological skill and being able to show a different screen, but go to this site. I hope that showed up well. It's www.worldwideweb.saturday-7.com. That's Saturday, October 7, with hyphens between each word, .com. What happened on October 7th was actually absolutely heinous. And according to Hamas senior leadership, that was just the rehearsal. They're going for what they want, which is to eliminate Israel from the river to the sea. That's all of Israel. The river they're referring to is the Jordan, and the sea they're referring to is the Mediterranean. Some of the left-wing progressives are so stupid. They think that the river is the Nile or the Euphrates or the Tigris, and they think the sea is the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, the left, sadly, the extreme element of the left has become so brain dead stupid that they don't even know very basic, simple geography. And when you make Palestine free from the river to the sea, that means you wipe Israel off the map. And if you think Israel is going to accept that, it's not going to happen. So, and why do Palestinians keep attacking Israel? Why do they keep having these intifadas that result in Israel responding with draconian measures and apartheid-like measures? Why do Palestinians keep doing that? Because a lot of Palestinians, so-called, view Israel as an illegitimate state. They view the land as having been stolen from them, and they want it back, and they want to wipe Israel out. And again, this is why there is no solution. Israel absolutely affirms its right to exist there on that piece of land. And those who call themselves Palestinians and their supporters, like Iran, they absolutely 100% do not recognize Israel's right to exist there. And so it's never going to end. There is one unrealistic possibility, and I wonder to what degree people are aware of individuals like Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King in today's world. Mahatma Gandhi is an incredibly compelling historical figure. He orchestrated the independence of India from Great Britain after World War II. He did it through nonviolence. And I think the term he used for it was ahisma, Ahisma. I don't know how it's pronounced. I believe it's a Hindu word, but he advocated nonviolence as a means to achieving political goals. And the brutality that Mahatma Gandhi's followers were subjected to by the British authorities was every bit as atrocious as what we're seeing in Gaza. But the Mahatma Gandhi's followers refused to fight back. They weren't like Hamas with their rockets and suicide bombers and everything else. and their militias going in. The reason I showed you this website is I want to show you what Hamas did. They're not a nonviolent, peaceful group. They're not Mahatma Gandhi. They're not Martin Luther King. That website contains some horrific images gleaned from Hamas themselves, because Hamas has Telegram groups and social media outlets that they use to promote themselves. And look at the wonderful thing we did to those horrible Jews. And you can look at some of those images and you can see what happened to Israel's citizens. And I know some will claim, some Palestinians, some terrorist apologists will say, well, those images aren't sourced, that they're not verified, that it's propaganda. Well, there is propaganda on every side in every war. Hamas and the so-called Palestinian supporters, they engage in propaganda as well. Propaganda is part of war. But Martin Luther King then took those same principles and he brought them into the South. And young people in particular, both black and white, would go into lunch counters that were segregated and would be dragged out by the police. And then another group would go and sit down and they would be dragged out and beaten up. There's one image I remember very well that I've seen repeatedly, and to me it exemplifies how Martin Luther King was able to take this principle of nonviolence and use it to advance the cause of civil rights in the U.S. South. What happened was, the image I always remember, it's a video, news footage, and it was a black gentleman dressed in a suit, wearing a hat, and he was simply walking across the street peacefully, and some young thugs, white, were yelling at him and hitting him, and one of them jumped up and kicked him in the back, knocked his hat off his head, and this gentleman didn't fight back. He just bent down, picked his hat up, put it back on his head, and continued in a very dignified manner to walk across the street. And that showed the world, and Mahatma Gandhi had laid the groundwork for that. He did that in India before, because the world media covered what was happening in India, and they saw the brutality of the British. And then Martin Luther King showed the brutality of white society in the South toward the black population, and it changed public opinion and brought about tangible, real, effective change. I do not think that's a realistic solution in Israel, because number one, the Israelis are certainly not going to respond nonviolently when Hamas, look at the images on there, thousands of rockets fired in that music festival where individuals were indiscriminately murdered, where children, babies are kidnapped and taken hostage. You want to talk about a war crime? How do you respond to that? How do you respond to someone engaged in asymmetrical warfare, to an enemy that does not take its troops out onto the field of battle and engage in traditional warfare, that takes babies as hostages? How do you confront that? And with the stated goal of wiping you off the map, of driving the entire Jewish population into the sea. And you want to find a peaceful solution? There's a book in the Bible called Ecclesiastes. You might have, I'm going to look it up. It's Ecclesiastes 3, verses 1 to 8. I'm going to end this off by reading from it. Look at that. You might know this from, there's a song that was written by Pete Seeger that was popularized in the 1960s by I think it was a British group called the Byrds. Chapter 3, Ecclesiastes, starting in verse 1. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend, tear, and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Thus ends the reading of the word. Thanks be to God. Thank you for watching. I see I got 2 thumbs up. Sharuyan, thank you for commenting. I always appreciate engagement. I'm going to leave this topic alone now for a while. I think I've beaten it to death. If you want to leave a comment, I will engage. If you think I'm wrong, but you better have your historical facts. Don't warp history. Don't change history to support your arguments or your opinions or your points of view. Stick to historical fact, verifiable historical fact. You can look up what I said. The San Remo Conference of 1920, when the British Mandate for Palestine was established, and how in 1921 they carved out a territory and gave the Palestinians, I guess, because if that entire area is called Palestine, well, anyone living in there is Palestinian. Well, they created a Palestinian state, but they called it Transjordan. And then later, another Palestinian state was created, but it wasn't just created, it was fought, died, and bled for during the 1948-1949 First Arab-Israeli War, first of 3 major battles, 1948, 1967, 1973. Gone on too long. Thank you for those who have subscribed or will, and we will talk to you probably not too long. Probably talk about the weather next. Global warming is killing us up here in Canada. All over this place, we're setting record lows, massive snowstorms. Oh, this global warming is something. Anyway, God bless and thanks for watching.